Bienvenidos a este espacio de conversación de UTP con los más reconocidos profesores de Harvard Business School. Por la relevancia de sus mensajes, la UTP ha decidido abrir el espacio más allá de la comunidad universitaria y ha decidido ponerlo a disposición de todos. En la primera sesión conversaremos con la profesora Frei. La doctora Frei es profesora principal de Tecnología y Gestión de Operaciones en Harvard Business School. Su investigación está centrada en cómo los líderes crean las condiciones en individuos y organizaciones para alcanzar la excelencia en estrategia, operaciones y cultura. En Harvard, Frances ha ocupado roles de liderazgo. Ha sido decana asociada en el programa ejecutivo y ha liderado el diseño del currículum del MBA. En el 2017, Frances asumió la posición de vicepresidente de liderazgo y estrategia en Uber, un desafío complejo en un contexto de cambio cultural. Además, es autora de los bestsellers Uncommon Service y Unleashed. Dr. Frei tiene un PhD en Operaciones y Gestión de la Información de Wharton School de University of Pennsylvania. Démosle a Frances la más cordial bienvenida. Okay, so Frances, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's a privilege to have you in this conversation with us. Thanks for your time and for your great disposition. I'm really sure
great
that
to see you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
It's great to see you. I'm just so happy to be here.
Fantastic. So let's start with we know that you have been studying trust recently. I mean, you have a new book released recently, and we're going to talk about that as well. But I would like to start with trust. Yeah. So trust and its impact on individuals, on organizations, and a society as a whole. So why don't we start by the definition of trust? How do you define trust? How does it look like? And how can we see its impact around us?
Beautiful. So the way we think about trust is that it's it's the goal, the beautiful thing, but it has three component parts to it. So trust is really the sum or maybe the multiplication of three different things. It's authenticity, logic, and empathy. So you will be likely to trust me, and I'll tell you what those words mean in a moment. You're more likely to trust me if you get a sense that it's the real me with rigorous logic and that I reveal that I'm in it for you. You're less likely to trust me if you doubt my authenticity, if you think I'm saying something that I don't totally believe. Maybe my boss said something to me and said, please go tell them this. And I'm like, no, I don't agree. And I say it anyway. People will be able to sniff out that I am lacking in authenticity. So people are unlikely to trust us if they doubt our authenticity, if they doubt the rigor of our thinking, our logic, or if they doubt our intentions or understanding of their position, if we doubt their empathy. The really beautiful thing is that if you lose trust with someone, we can always trace it back to authenticity, logic, and empathy. And so whichever one it is, we trace it back to one of those, we diagnose it, and we have a prescription that can come back and overcome it.
Awesome. Maybe we can talk about the description in a few minutes, but
yeah,
I would like to stop in those three components. I think that those three components are critical to understand the concept. And so about empathy. I have this issue with empathy because sometimes I feel that usually when we think about empathy, we think about first trying to understand and walk with other people's shoes. But many times we believe that we are understanding others, but in fact, we are projecting our own perspective on them.
Yeah.
You know, is empathy possible without incorporating feelings and emotions into the dialogue to check our inferences about what other people may be thinking?
Well, I think, it's a beautiful question, Jonathan. And I think if people are just like us, we don't have to do too many checks of the inferences because our instincts are probably right. But the more different someone is from us, the more we better check all of our inferences, because the less likely our instincts are to be correct. And so we should, and what's beautiful about that, which means that I will just naturally be empathetic to you if you're just like me. And it will be, I'll have to have some extra thought and care if you're different than me, which is why we very much think about all of these things in a diversity and inclusion way as well.
Yes, and that's also a very important thing because it's interconnected with trust. I mean, diversity and inclusion. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So if you have, and if we think about diversity, and I think about diversity as difference. So homogeneity is cookie cutter the same. But if I want to bring together two people that are different, and then a third person that's different, and a fourth person that's different, I want to bring in all of this beautiful variety. I have to manage it with some pretty curated management techniques, or else we're going to underperform. Here's a curated management technique. If you put a group of people that are different than one another in a room and film them anywhere in the world, and then watch the film afterwards, they will all have been looking for what they had in common everywhere in the world. Our natural instinct is find commonality. And that's great when we're similar to one another. But the more different we are, the less there is in common with one another. And so if we're not careful, we would only have just a little bit of overlap to inform our decisions and to improve our quality. So what we have to do is that when we're different, we have to encourage the inclusion of everyone. We have to work to bring out all of you and all of me, as opposed to just the part of us that overlaps. And so I think that is a big part of trust.
But how can we do that? I mean, inclusion is something that
it sounds like crazy, right? It sounds not crazy, but it sounds ethereal. Yeah.
I mean, to allow everybody to feel themselves in the environment they're in.
Yeah. So here's the way to do it. It's got 4 progressive steps to it. So step 1, regardless of any difference you or I represent, the group that we're in is responsible for us feeling physically and emotionally safe. And this is a group's responsibility. It's never the responsibility of one person for inclusion. So I can't make myself feel physically and emotionally safe. You can't make yourself feel physically and emotionally safe. But I could participate in yours and you could participate in mine. So that's the way to think about it. So 1, it's safety first, regardless of any difference that we bring to the table. And that's a big deal. And then once you feel physically and emotionally safe, then you get to graduate to, I feel welcome. So we got the basic need of physical and emotionally safe, but now it's that regardless of the difference, I feel welcome. And here's the way you can think about welcome. When someone walks into a room, Zoom, it's a little different, but not that much different. Do you bring your shoulders towards the person? Or your eyes towards them? Are you smiling? You know, it's like really little eyes, smile, shoulders. If those are all towards someone, they're going to feel very welcomed. And any of those are away, they're not going to feel welcome. So whenever a new person comes into the room, particularly if they're different, I have to make sure that they feel welcome. So safe, then welcome. And then we need to figure out what's the uniqueness, like what's the beautiful uniqueness within you, Jonathan, within me, within others. And we want to celebrate us for our uniqueness, not our commonality. And that's the tricky part, because we're so drawn to what's the same that, so like if you say something, Jonathan, and then I think in my mind, oh my gosh, that's what I was going to say. I'm going to tell Jonathan that. Jonathan, what you said was awesome. That's what I was going to say. Yes. Yeah. It feels great. And we've just celebrated sameness. So instead, I want to be, when you say something, Jonathan, that's completely different than what I thought. Jonathan, holy cow. I would never have thought that without you. That was awesome. Like I want to give the same amount of celebration, but we want to celebrate uniqueness and difference in addition to what we very instinctually do, which is to celebrate sameness. It's hard to foster our own authenticity. I mean, we can do some things, but like when I'm alone, I don't have an authenticity problem. Nobody does. It's only when we're in a group And what the others in the group do can really influence whether or not they're really interested in what is unique about me. We, of course, Anne and I, who wrote the book, we, of course, care about it because you will perform better if you get the input from more and more varied people. So we know that this is how you win, but we also know that if we're not careful, instincts will actually work against it.
And what about logic, Frances? I mean, how does it work? I mean, just explaining our reasoning, the reasons behind our decision, how does it?
Yeah, so it's right. So sometimes that's all it requires is that, so if you think I'm not logical, you're not going to trust me. And so there's two reasons that you might think I'm not logical. One is I really don't have very good logic and I'm communicating that perfectly effectively. So I have a substance problem. Mm-hmm. But the other is, and maybe much more prevalent and a little sadder, is I have really good logic, but the way in which I'm communicating it to you, I'm losing you in the communication. So you think I don't understand it, but I really, really do understand it. That's a style problem. So there's a style and a substance. The style is like 90% of the time, and the substance is only 10% of the time. And so and we know how to overcome both of them, but you have to first diagnose, is it a substance problem or a style problem?
But communication seems to be like a transversal, tool for both authenticity, empathy, and logic. It seems like that at the end, leadership express themselves through dialogue and the way they communicate to others. Is that?
Well, yeah, so communication writ large is important, but let me give you a few communicative differences that might work. So I told you one that my instinct would be to celebrate your sameness, and I really should celebrate your difference. Both communicating, both celebrating, but it's when I'm celebrating. So that was the one we just did. On logic, it's if I just have something super important to tell you, but you know what? I did a lot of work. The reason it's so important is because I talked to so many people and I did so much research, and I just feel so good about it. And I want to tell you some parts of it so that it'll assure you with confidence that I did it. If I tell you all of those things before I tell you my main point, versus I tell you my conclusion and then tell you all those things, it's the same amount of information. One gets digested well, the other does not. And so that's what we mean by communication.
Like counterintuitive in certain ways, because usually you think like you want to express your logic in a way that you can get to the conclusion.
Yeah, and if you're a beautiful storyteller, you can do that. But if at all you find yourself people questioning your logic, my hypothesis is that you've been doing too much of this before this. And then we should start with this and then do this.
Interesting. So, Frances, I mean, we have been talking about trust and its components and logic and I'm thinking about a logic, empathetic, and authentic leader.
Yeah.
But who doesn't get results. I mean, his logic. I mean, not necessarily doing this involves getting the results you want.
Yeah.
So is it possible to gain trust even if you're logic, authentic, and empathetic, if you don't get results? And if so, for how long?
Yeah, so I think here's the way you can think about that. First of all, if you're, at some point, people are going to start questioning your logic. Like if we trust you and we're like using your plan and it's not producing results, we're going to be like, you've been telling us that 2 + 2 is 5, but we're starting to suspect it's not. So I think what will happen is pretty quickly, people will doubt your logic because your plan is not achieving results. So I don't think you can have logic for a long time without results, because your logic just won't be making any sense.
Even though it's not necessarily, I mean, a good process sometimes get to not very good results, and sometimes not a very good process get to good results. I mean, it's not cause effect necessarily, but I guess that in time.
In time, it's, you know, I mean, let's say you're getting lucky. You're not logical, but you're doing well. To your point, I don't know that you will reliably be lucky.
I see.
Actually, if you are reliably lucky, maybe you get you keep hitting the winning lottery ticket. All right, well, and we are all benefiting. All right.
It's not sustainable anyway.
Yeah.
So what about a good example of a great trust culture? I mean, someone who can inspire us.
Yeah. So there's a couple of examples I like today, but my favorite one today is Microsoft. So Microsoft used to be, I mean, it's such a Bill Gates, then Steve Ballmer, now Satya Nadella, and it's been iconic each time. But Bill Gates was many things, but he didn't really create a trusted environment. Got great results, but not through trust. Steve Ballmer, he created a lot of trust, but not always got the great results. Satya Nadella has come in, and in the last 5 to 6 years, if you look at Microsoft, its performance has exploded. He has done it an awful lot based on trust, which tells me even if your organization has hundreds of thousands of people, and even if it's really well established, you can turn on trust and supercharge performance. And so he is my superhero today. The other one is at Walmart. Doug McMillon has really done an amazing job of building trust, particularly recently. And I think that's, they're competing against Amazon. Well, how do they still exist? And yet they're still existing and still doing quite well. And I think it's because of him. And then there's also then some startups. So one of my favorite startups is a company called Gusto. Gusto, which you wouldn't have heard of it. It's relatively small, although a unicorn and growing very fast. And we'll hear about it someday. But they provide for small businesses. They provide all of your human resource processing, your benefits. They do everything a small business needs so that the small business can think on creating value, and they do all of the back office. Lexi Reese, the woman who is the COO there, took that organization, and it was like an okay trusted one. It is now the most trusted player in the space, and they have just crushed the competition because the employees built trust with the customers. So they have things like their net promoter score is, a 90 or something just ridiculous. And it's all based on trust.
And the other way around, I mean, if you are a leader and you want to know if your organization has an accurate level of trust, I mean, or a sufficient level of trust, how can you get some insight about what's going on?
Yeah, so 2 ways, I think. One is in your annual surveys or quarterly surveys, when you're asking people questions like how satisfied are you, how engaged are you, some of those questions will help get to trust. In fact, some organizations ask it directly. Other organizations ask it indirectly, but I think that there'll be some amount of sentiment questions, like how do you feel? Tell us how you feel. So self-reported. That's one way. The other way, in my mind, is to look at the performance, the numbers, the outcomes across all of the people. And if there are differences between men and women in performance, or between people who were born and raised in Peru or came in from Spain, or what, if there are differences, anywhere there are differences in performance, I would go in and look and see, is that due to a breakdown in trust in the group that is underperforming? So I look at your reported sentiment, and then I look at demographics that are different in performance. And if there are, those are the 2 quick places I go to look. That solves it. Like, if that's where you went first, and honestly, if you stopped after you closed those performance gaps and rose the sentiment, that'd be plenty.
Working with us in Peru, and not only with the group we're working with, but in general, I guess you're more familiar with Peruvian culture and the way we are. So
yeah.
So if you what do you think are main challenges we may have as a society? I mean, to overcome the trust issues and promote a culture of trust around us in our organization, in our society.
Yeah, and I've been so blessed to be able to travel, and I argue that if I could have 2 passports, my second one would be from Peru, because that's like my affection for the country is second to the country where I am from. So first, let me just tell you some patterns I have seen. So over this decade, we have seen, like, visibly seen things change. So just things like when we're in at UTEP, maybe, or certainly at Casa Camacho when we would do teachings there. So a lot of people used to smoke. Mm-hmm. We see far fewer people smoking. So Das and I, but Professor Das, who would come down with me and teach, we would notice behavioral differences. So, you know, okay, that doesn't really mean something. That was one that we found curious. And then we would see the cars on the road were starting to appear to be like there'd be more people traveling together. It just, like, we just started seeing some behavioral things, and we were like, huh, what's going on? And when we would listen, you know, out at the restaurant, or we would watch and observe in each of the businesses, and what we would see is a high level of engagement, which is super necessary, right? So so like totally engaging, and we would also see an enormous competition, like. And you know this, Jonathan, I met you when I met, like, you know, 49 others, and you guys adored each other, but super competitive with one another, like super competitive. And that's like a beautiful thing, is that we're engaged and we're competitive. And so those are beautiful, and we care. The place where I would say that there's an opportunity, where there's a challenge, is that Peru cares, people in Peru have a lot of trust in spreadsheets. A lot of trust in spreadsheets. So whatever the numbers tell me, that's the performance. And I like that too, as long as it's an accurate reflection of who did the contribution. So the same way you said that you could be lucky, sometimes somebody gets put into a business that is doing well, and they are there when it's doing well, and so we say they're great. Or someone really is great, and you put them in a struggling business. So what I have seen is someone did great, you promote them to a really challenging situation, they don't do as well, and we were like, huh, I thought they were great, I guess they're not. It's sort of this, you know, what have you achieved lately thing, as opposed to maybe it was a better fit over here than over here. So I would say that the opportunity is to see, maybe just see a little bit more broadly.
So in terms of the 3 components that we have been discussing before, I mean, what is that? It's authenticity, it's empathy, it's logic.
Empathy.
Combination, empathy.
Yeah.
It's not seeing the other person as
a three-dimensional person, yeah. You know, the logic is super good. I think the authenticity is strong in Peru, but the empathy of others, it's there. But if we like put a time pressure on you, I think empathy is the first to go.
Yeah.
Somehow thinking that it's not as costly to do it without empathy, which is of course not true.
Yeah, and maybe that's why we still have the diversity challenge and the inclusion challenge. I mean, and
yeah, I think that it's simply empathy. Like, if we are empathetic to people who are different than us, we're totally empathetic to people who are just like us. But if we are empathetic to people who are different than us, I don't think we would have the diversity and inclusion challenges nearly as much as we do.
Maybe as you know, this conversation is also be seen by our students at UTP. We have this.
Oh, good. The next generation. Good.
Next generation. So I was thinking, what advice would you give them to start fostering a culture of trust, even if when they probably the jobs they're gonna get are not gonna be in a position of formal leadership or
no,
power.
of course.
So from that position, is it possible to be an agent of trust around you?
Yes, and here's how I would start. First, be an agent of trust, and I like that we could have like a T-shirt or something that was the agent of trust, maybe a Mission Impossible. But to be an agent of trust, first do it amongst your peers.
Mm-hmm.
So for our students, do it amongst the other students. But do it in a way that you can be yourself with rigorous logic and that you care about everyone else. So if you start making other people better earlier on in your career will propel. And it seems counterintuitive, right? Because in the beginning you think, well, it's all about me. If I do well, I'll get promoted.
Mm-hmm.
If I do well versus Jonathan, you also do well, but you make everyone else do better. You have more leadership potential than I do. I can only make myself get better, and you can make many people get better. So what I would say to people that when they come in, as soon as you can, definitely think about your individual contribution first. But the second you want to start accelerating, moving up in an organization, you have to think, how can I make other people better? And if I can figure out that magic, I can really help the performance of the company, because one to many is much better than just the one.
Yeah,
so be the person everybody wants to pick on their team, because you make the team better.
So we need to talk about this pandemic that is,
oh, yes,
the world is affected by it, and I guess trust as well. I mean, it has an impact on everything. So I have heard read your books and I watch your TED Talks, and you talk about the devices and technological devices and how do they distract us from being there, and make other feel our presence there. So I guess with this pandemic, how Zoom meetings and you don't know if I'm looking at my phone or
yeah.
And at the same time, many other things that we have been, just overlooking. So how in your feeling of this, what's going on, how would that affect trust?
It's a great question. It's a great question. So if I'm in a Zoom meeting and the video is on for everyone, so video on, we can all see each other. If I'm speaking, what you're doing non-verbally makes it easier or harder for me to speak. So you're magnificent, Jonathan. You look, you're paying attention, you smile, like you give your eyes, your smile, and your shoulders. You are welcoming to me, and it makes me perform better. Versus if you were speaking and on Zoom, you saw me doing this. And clearly, it used to be in person, you'd see me looking down at my phone, but on Zoom, you now see me looking away. And not really, so it's, if I'm giving you my attention versus I give you my distraction, that's where all of the difference is. So when I'm giving you my distraction, and maybe I'm multitasking, it's all about me, I can just tell you that you are destined to be an individual contributor if you give others your distraction. If you want to be a manager and get promoted and promoted and promoted, you need to be other distracted versus self-distracted. So here's a quick test I do, and your students, students can do it for themselves. Just look around and see who's self-distracted, who's other. Look at all of the great leaders. But for this pandemic, which is just heartbreaking and experienced by everyone around the world, here's a test that I do. For every world leader for every country or every region, I line up and I say, how much is this leader self-distracted versus other distracted? So self-distracted bad, other distracted good. And so I just, by my own measures, I put them from top to bottom. And then by my own measures, how well are they doing managing the pandemic? There is a really strong overlap.
You have done this actually? Wow.
And you can repeat it, doing it yourself, just by your own understanding of self-distracted to other distracted, and your own understanding of how it's going in the pandemic. It's shocking. Or maybe not shocking, but the correlation is super strong. When I am other distracted, I'm keeping this really complex system. It's getting better. When I'm self-distracted, it goes and fits and starts, and it's actually not going well. So the advice I would give to young people, particularly in the times of really big collective complexity, is get your own work done but be other distracted as much as possible in order to help them achieve. And then we collectively will achieve so much more. And that's the thing that I have seen over the last 10 years. The collective performance of the country, of the companies, it's incredible to me, really incredible. And to me, that involves some amount of other distraction. Like we're looking out for each other. In a pandemic, it's tempting to just look out for ourselves, but when leaders look out for others, they're able to mitigate things that are as complicated as this pandemic.
Interesting. Yeah, and this applies for young people and also for big shot executives.
I think the same. It applies the same amount. Yeah.
So, Frances, tell us about your new book. It's Unleashed.
Yes, I have it right here.
Leaders Guide to Empowering Everyone Around Us. Oh,
yeah.
Awesome. It has been out since June, I think, isn't it?
Yes, June. It came not the most convenient time for a book launch, but it's meant to endure. But to tell you about the book, there's just there's a quote by someone else to inspire the book. And so a woman named Toni Morrison, a beautiful writer. Yeah. So we started the book with her quote, and it's, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, then you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower someone else. And I think that's what I'm trying to say about self to other. Yeah. If I don't have power, I don't have to think about empowering others. But as soon as I start getting some power, if I empower others, that's when we get that multiplicative effect and things go better and better and better. So we were really inspired by Toni Morrison from that part of it.
Oh yeah, Toni Morrison. So but it's about leadership at the end. So you, in some part of it, it's electrifying to be seen as the person we may become.
Yes. So here's so if you want to bring out the best in someone else, you can interact with who they are, but you can also interact with a little bit of a stretch goal of who they are. So I can interact with you, but I could also say, I know if you got everything right, I can interact with a version of you. So it's kind of like stretch goals, but applied to the whole human. I'm going to interact with you, not for what you can do today, but what you might do tomorrow. And I think that's the part. I'm interacting with you and your trajectory and your ambition. When I interact with that, I want to achieve more. Like it really is, electrifying is exactly the right word. It's electrifying to be seen for who you are and who you might become.
Yeah, sure. And that's the whole idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy at the end. So,
yeah. And the whole idea of education, right? I mean, that's what we want to be doing with each other in education. Yeah.
Exactly. So no proximal, development.
Yeah.
Vygotsky. But at the same time, there is a flip side of it, because, if you, sometimes it's like, I mean, how can I say this? Maybe you can convey through your actions or through your expectations or through your, I mean, implicitly or explicitly, this idea that if you're not up to our expectation, I'm gonna be disappointed. And if you're in a position of power, that may limit your possibility to be authentic and to be.
Well, so here's what I would say. I think high expectations are needed. Like, I've seen very few people thrive in the presence of low standards and low expectations. So everyone in the world who I've seen thrive, somebody set high expectations for them at some point. So high expectations are very good, but they're not very good alone. They need to be joined with a deep devotion to your success. And deep devotion to your success is very good, but not alone. It needs to be joined with high expectations. And so when you join these two together, then it's actually a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's great. So, and this idea of I mean, make others feel your presence so that in your absence they can be the person. Can you explain that?
I sure can. So leadership is about other people, right? It's about making others better. It's about the performance of others. So leadership is like going up and to the right, getting people to do better over time as a result of my presence. And like I can coach you and I can develop you. But then when I leave, maybe I go on to another job, maybe I leave the company, maybe I go home for the weekend. Maybe there's a global pandemic and it's just when I'm on Zoom or not. But so my job is to make you better while I'm here so that you get better over time, what we call up and to the right. But it's also to do it in such a way that you can continue to get better in my absence. So if I make you reliant on me, that's only going to be so helpful for you, and it's only going to be so helpful for the organization. But if I can get you to be self-reliant over time and then help others become more reliant. So presence and then absence, presence and then absence. I think then that's when we have a really beautiful thing. So, and this is true for parenting as well. Is that when we make our kids are thriving in our presence, but we want to do it so that they can thrive in our absence. We have to teach them the resilience and things like that as well.
And independence and autonomy.
And independence, yes, yes.
You mentioned as well that trust is a condition that it's necessary but not sufficient. I mean, it's the first step.
Yes.
Can you briefly talk about it?
So trust is the first step. The high expectations and deep devotion together, which we call love. It's because we think it's the greatest act of love is to help bring out the best in someone else. That's step 2. Step 3 is how do I bring out the best in groups, particularly groups that are more and more varied. And so, there are ways to do that. So we call it trust, love, belonging. So those are the first 3 steps in our presence. Our absence then gets super fun because when I'm no longer with you, so Jonathan, you set the conditions for me to succeed and then you move on and I'm like, whoa, what do I do? And when you're gone, the only things I have left to guide my behavior are my understanding of the culture, my experience of the culture, and my understanding of the strategy. You have left behind my understanding of the strategy and culture. And so you better be thinking really hard while you're here about the strategy and the culture, because when you leave the room, those are the only 2 things that stay behind you. And so those are the things that and here's the strategy part is super fun, because if you have a really complicated strategy that you understand, but I don't, when you leave the room, that complicated strategy is not going to get implemented because you're not here to like decipher it for me. So it really has to be my understanding. So you have to understand it deeply so that you can describe it simply. Well,
Frances, that has been awesome. Thanks again for your presence. And I'm sure that because having you with us today will be better in your absence.
So, and I really appreciate it, Jonathan. I also just want to say thank you to you. Since day one I feel like when Das and I got off the plane, this isn't exactly true, but you met us. You didn't meet us at the plane, but you met us every step, and you've been with us every step of the way. And it's, you set the conditions for us to thrive. And so we can lead in all different kinds of way. And we were different, and you were very welcoming of our different. And so I'm personally really grateful to what you're doing. I'm so delighted to see your success, and you are really other focused, and I admire that so much about you. So thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Big hug.
Good.
Gracias a la doctora Frei y a todos ustedes por su presencia. Queden atentos porque nuevos conversatorios con los mejores profesores de Harvard Business School estarán disponibles muy pronto.